Ho-hum, just another 7-game winning streak. I believe Winnipeg's third of the season now. They find themselves on after shutting out the Carolina Hurricanes 3-0. Find out how on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we are just finishing up after Winnipeg shut out the Carolina Hurricanes 3-0. A lot to take away from this game, a lot to go into. A very back-and-forth affair, lots of good and some perhaps not so good that we'll dive into in just a little bit. But before we talk about how the Jets extended their winning streak to 7 games, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll get $200 in bonus bucks in chances to play even more. And all that you have to do is just download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Now, like I said, the Jets have just come off a big 3-0 shutout win over the Carolina Hurricanes, and Carolina is second in the Metro. They are a pretty darn good team, and, coming into this one, they traditionally have a very big reputation of being a high shot volume, low quality sort of squad. That's not really what happened in this game. Winnipeg, quite frankly, was put, under some real duress in this one, where the Carolina top 6 was really good. Rantanen, looking on that top line alongside Aho, he is just, oh Lord, am I glad that he is out of the Central, man. Whenever he was on the ice, the Canes really did have a sizable shot share advantage and certainly a shot quality advantage. But where they struggled was he would hit a post, they'd just miss, or the Jets would block the shot and counter off of it, and Winnipeg would then create chaos of its own at the other end, right? Pyotr Kochetkov actually gave the Jets a couple of really good scoring opportunities, a couple of really bad giveaways from him, and Winnipeg's depth really kind of fought real hard in this game, right? The top line, again, I said coming into this game, I was kind of wondering which version we would see. And, my skepticism about them against top-end contenders, I think, was kind of validated again. They were pretty quiet for the most part. They did have a couple of decent scoring chances, but for the most part, they just really couldn't get a handle on this game. Paired against other, top lines and stuff, it just seems like they can't really control the offensive zone possession, or when they're there, they're not really able to create a lot. And so it asks everyone else to really step up. The great thing for the Jets is that they have the best power play in the league, and certainly one on an historic pace, and they also have some of the best goaltending in the league. Now, Hellebuyck didn't start in this game, which I was a little bit surprised by, but it just seems like, with the Jets wanting to maybe give Hellebuyck a little more rest, especially down this final stretch, we may see a few extra games of Comrie, and Comrie, I think, has kind of acquitted himself nicely. It's just that, unfortunately for him, the Jets, every time he plays, have not been good in front of him. So it's rare when he finally gets a win. But lo and behold, he gets a shutout, his second straight victory after really not winning any of his previous starts. Just a really good feeling, right? This was one of those games where the vibes were high. I'm sure the crowd was pretty into it. And, it was fun to see some of our young talents and, players who have been recent joiners to the team really, engage and be effective against a really good Carolina team. The Canes, quite frankly, were the better squad, although I would say it was a fairly close back and forth game. But, the Jets had they had the difference, right? They had the better special teams, they had the better goaltending, and that made a really big difference. So a 3-0 win, very good. Also very interesting, the Jets video coaching staff doesn't often get mentioned a lot, especially when we're talking about challenges, but there were like 3 different instances where Matt Prefontaine had some real involvement tonight. and he got all of his calls right. Whenever he told the Jets to challenge, they got every single one, which is pretty amazing. I don't know what his eyes are made out of, if he's got like X-ray vision or something, but anytime the Jets have now challenged, his involvement has been huge in making sure that not only is it a good challenge, but it's also one the Jets are basically guaranteed to win. So really impressive. He helped get the Jets, some real good overturns and also a good goal, which should have been confirmed to begin with. Kupari got one that was a greasy crease goal, but it also was one where I thought he actually tried to avoid Kochetkov in the crease and step over him to not impede him so that his goal would actually count. But man, a lot of stuff. The Jets had, their own goals ruled out. So very back and forth game, lots of chaos, lots to track. If there were some things that maybe the Jets won't enjoy, I think the biggest problem with this game was really the puck management, right? Especially in the defensive zone. Winnipeg really did struggle with a lot of the forechecking and pressure that Carolina put on them. It was especially noticeable on one particular shift where it was the Samberg-Pionk pairing out there with the top line. And I don't even really think I put that much blame initially on the top line here. They didn't help, but really Pionk just kind of sailed a pass to Scheifele that Mark wasn't really expecting. It wasn't a good pass. It gets picked off. And from there on, that whole pairing and line trio gets stuck for a good 2 or 3 shifts worth of ice time. And Pionk kind of multiple times failed to clear the puck out of the zone. So I think this is the part of his game where you see him and you're like, okay, he did score a really fun slap shot goal in this one, but you also see him kind of have these moments of chaos in his own end. And it's like, this is why I'd prefer if he was to extend to be in the $4 million range. If you're getting to 5 or 6 or even more than that, it's just too much for what he brings because, he's only going to be able to be this kind of player, the offensively effective one when he's with a really competent top pairing sort of anchor to his left. And that's really just Samberg right now. So, for me, I enjoy watching him do the slap shot stuff, but I think shifts like this where he's, super chaotic and really struggles to make these clean exits and passes, that's where I'm like, I think this is probably Winnipeg's last year with him, or should be at least. But he may price himself out of Winnipeg anyways. He still scores, the lights out and has been very offensively productive. And so his next raise, I can tell you, is going to be a lot of money. If he goes to free agency and tests the market, he can get a huge payday somewhere. So all power to him. I hope that he finds a really good team. I just don't feel it should probably be Winnipeg unless he takes a discount. But I also don't think that's really fair to expect of a guy who's kind of looking for one of his last big paydays before he hits the twilight of his career. But otherwise, this game was fun. It was, again, probably not the cleanest, and I'm sure Arniel won't love it. I think the scoreline was probably a little flattering. Comrie, I think, had some real work to do and could also probably kiss his posts a couple of times. But, one of those situations where if you're going to have a couple of really big games, you're not going to win all of them the cleanest, and you'll happily take a big 3-0 victory over a very, very good, very tough Carolina team. So impressive win, just really, continues the good vibes. And now the Jets are going to go on and face the New York Islanders, who have somehow clawed themselves back into a playoff contending sort of position. Not one that I think they'll, cement for the rest of the season, but they are in the mix right now. It'll be a Friday game and perhaps a chance to see some guys the Jets may be targeting in trade. But if Lou thinks that this team is competitive, I kind of worry they're going to do the opposite and become buyers instead. So something to keep an eye on. The Islanders have lots of guys I think the Jets would probably have a modicum of interest in. We'll have to see if they're willing to sell. But for the meantime, big win, big victory. Everyone's excited. And I want to talk about a couple of different aspects of what stood out in particular, because I think some of this is a recurring theme, right? It's the depth and a couple of key players who I think have really taken strides this year, strides forward, and really progressed into elite players in some capacity in their own rights. But we'll chat about that in just a little bit. Before we dive into all of the fun stuff, though, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, Philadelphia, Kansas City, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting who scores the first touchdown, how many yards Patrick Mahomes is going to scramble for, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the throw from kickoff to the final whistle. We all know that we probably want to have at least a little bit of cash down for Jalen Hurts tush pushes, but there probably has to be some limit for how many he can get in one game. So if you think you might know, this is a great opportunity to get in on the action right now. And again, if you are a new customer and you bet $5 and actually win that bet, you'll get $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl to play even more. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Remember, bet $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about some interesting observations from Winnipeg's past month or two, and perhaps even longer. Obviously, we just came off a big 3-0 win against Carolina. Now we're kind of talking more about some bigger picture stuff, and I think themes that have come out not only from this game and the Caps game, but really from the season at large. And one of the first things that I've noticed a lot this year is something that did kind of continue with the Bones, or sort of began with the Bones administration, if you want to call it. The depth for the Jets has really stepped up in ways this year that I'm not sure most of us really anticipated. We did know that the depth for the Jets typically, at least drives positive defensive results, less so in the offensive category. But this year, I feel like Winnipeg has seen some considerable growth from a number of different players in the bottom six, and they have really taken it to heart to try and help out a top line at times that has struggled to create at 5v5. And I'm not going to say that the depth is necessarily killing it in every respect. They'll have games where they're maybe off the pace, games where they don't really score much or offer enough offensive support, but they're giving the Jets a fighting chance in a lot of these games. And I think in this one in particular, you saw Nemesnikov really drive towards the net, and he's looked a lot more resurgent lately. You saw Perfetti be a really creative force out there, Niederreiter cashing in and also being a general menace down low. He could have had probably 2 goals, maybe even 3 tonight. You had Kupari cashing in. I mean, there was just a lot to like in this game. Parker Ford making his 3rd NHL game now, looked pretty fun, pretty spry. Actually could have had 1 goal had it not been for a pretty solid Kochetkov save. So, just very interesting contributions up and down the lineup. And I think it really speaks to how balanced Winnipeg has been this year, especially when they're not a team. Again, as I've said before, they have to win by committee, right? They don't have individually superstar players the way, Edmonton or in the past Colorado or Vegas does. They're a squad that has to roll 4 lines and beat you and wear you down and win that way. And I think when Winnipeg, gets through this upcoming trade deadline, we are going to see the best form of that we've seen since 2017, 2018. This squad feels like it's on the cusp of putting more and more pieces together. And we've seen some interesting changes. Ehlers and Perfetti were really bad together a couple months ago. It wasn't until the past couple of weeks that they were reunited where it feels like there's been a noticeable shift. I feel like Ehlers is coming on the interior more often, which is really big because Perfetti is the kind of guy who likes to sit more out towards the wide spaces and around the faceoff circles and sort of dish to the slot, which is not usually how Ehlers wants to receive the puck. He's a guy who's doing the perimeter creation, but they've actively tried to change their games, actively tried to work better, and that line has really started to come into its own to a point where, you don't feel as urgent a need to try and split them up. If anything, I think the top line has really stagnated just a bit recently. And so, I say against like good opponents, right? Against bad teams, the top line really doesn't have any problems. They kind of eat through mediocre or bad opponents like it's, a whole stack of candy. But when it comes to these top opponents, I think this is where the Jets' other 3 lines have really stepped up and have been a huge asset. And especially with the power play being so good on both units, it's fantastic, right? The Jets' top power play tonight really wasn't that great. PP2 was the one that frankly led the way. And so when you're not going to have your best players be at their best on a given evening, it's nice to know that your other lines can really, take care of business and carry the load. And if there's one thing that I think the Jets have really done a good job of, it's kind of cornering the market recently on pretty good depth contributors. I would say like the third and fourth lines have lots of guys who I think other teams would covet. We're currently down one of our best ones, and the Jets are still doing pretty well. Being down Lowry and having this level of results is quite impressive. It does make me wonder, though, when he comes back, where they'll use him. I would like to see him again up there with Lowry and Perfetti, with Ehlers and Perfetti. I think that Ehlers-Lowry combo was really eye-opening and really fun, and it could also help the Jets sort of determine how they want to build, their forward core through the trade deadline. Do they want to add a big winger? Do they want to go down for a center again? I think that they've got lots of ways to try and cook this turkey and, really deliver it, because I think Winnipeg has a fantastic opportunity this year to reinforce a squad that's already looking really good, and they could turn this team into an even bigger juggernaut than it already is. So, this has just been a really fun run, a really fun season. You compare it to the expectations coming into this year, and like if the Jets missed the playoffs but showed considerable growth, I would have been happy. I would have been fine if, this was a year where the youth took over, where they had them, in positions to sort of grow and develop. The Jets have kind of gone a little bit of a different direction, but it's one that's still very effective and one that takes advantage of just how good Hellebuck still is. And so, I think it looks like it's been the right decision. Things appear to be going pretty well. And earlier at the start of the season, I said it did appear the Jets were running it back, and that was a mistake. That ended up not really being 100% the case. I think the special teams coaching has really had a profound impact. Davis Payne has been so good that I kind of worry he's actually going to get recruited in the offseason. So if you're the Jets, find a locker in the locker room somewhere in Winnipeg, shove Davis Payne in there for the rest of the summer. Don't let him out until October. Do not let him interview anywhere, because I think he might actually be somebody that, some teams looking for a big head coaching candidate who might be worth, giving an elevated role to, could be after him. I mean, he's seemingly got this power play playing like it's the Harlem Globetrotters every single night. And so surely the open-mindedness, the tactical approach, the way that he thinks about the game, it's going to be attractive to somebody. He seems like a very forward-thinking coach. I'm actually very interested to see what happens with him after this season. I really do hope the Jets keep him, because this power play is just, it is to die for, man. It's so good that I've actually only half joked that I worry the refs won't give the Jets any, because they know in the playoffs it is going to be almost a game decider from the first outing. So, will be interesting to see how the Jets manage that. The 5v5 production, I think, is something that they'll want to work on. But I think, the depth lines have really done their part to try and boost and support the top six as much as possible. I've been really impressed with how hard they fight. They just do not quit on plays. And it's nice to see that, individually guys like Kupari have really stepped up. Gustafsson has been much better lately. He's actually recording legitimate points. He had another assist in tonight's game. Sure, it was a secondary assist, but all the same, you're just really happy to see his role growing. He continues to, really impress me. And, Iafallo, still a fantastic contributor. Iafallo actually had the first really impressive play of this game on a ridiculous individual effort to drive towards the slot from a pretty far distance out. He led his own entry. He drove between 3 or 4 defenders, and he found Niederreiter for the first power play goal. Fantastic individual effort. If he, is willing to come back for like $3 million, I would easily ink that contract yesterday. But he's 32. I think he's 32, maybe 31. He's at the age where, he's probably thinking about the next couple of years being more towards the end of his career. And if he does want to go somewhere and get a raise, he has more than earned that right. But I do hope that there's a way that the Jets can keep him at a lower cap hit. I think he's a great player for us. I think he's very versatile. And sure, you may not want him on your top line, but he has provided a lot of tertiary value elsewhere. So happy for him. Good to see him thriving. and hope that there is some kind of a way that the Jets can make him a little bit of a longer term Jet. If he does go, Winnipeg does have guys internally who can probably fill in, but I don't know. Sometimes that extra level of veteran experience who, is actually good at what they do and can also PK and just be a nice, effective middle six presence. It's something you really can't hate. So we'll just have to see how all of those negotiations go. But speaking of negotiations, Perfetti and Samberg, they're going to be due for some money here pretty soon. And both of them, in my mind, have really shown why I'm high on both. I want to chat about how each has really grown their game this season and what, the rest of their futures might hold if they sign long-term with the Jets in just a little bit. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about a lot of takeaways from Winnipeg recently, from the broader season, and, from some of their recent games. And I want to spend some time talking about a couple of guys who, in my mind, have really become extremely critical contributors, players that, I personally did not expect to perhaps grow to the level of significance this quickly, but at least one of them I did. The other, Samberg, I thought he would be good in his career, but he has really started to elevate his game to a level that I think a lot of us weren't really anticipating. Let's start off with Samberg, actually, because I think he might be one of the more fun and perhaps less talked about players on this team. But Samberg might as well be one of our MVP skaters of the season. What he has done on the second pairing is basically give the Jets a number one defender to pair alongside Pionk. You have a 1-2 punch of Morrissey and Samberg on your left side. That is, you basically have two first pairings. I know, especially with DeMello maybe slowing down and Pionk having some of the chaos in his game, the fact that these two pairings have been really anchored by two of the best puck-moving blue liners in the league has been a tremendous, tremendous asset. And I think it's gone a long way to helping the Jets stabilize a blue line that for the last several years really has kind of been all over the place. You've had lots of transition. You've had the core kind of being swapped out. Enstrom and Bufflin gone many years ago. You had Myers out. You've brought in lots of depth players, but not a lot of guys that you actually want to make long-term defenders. And so for the Jets, finding an elite number one on your left side to go behind your already franchise number one is pretty friggin' fantastic. Somebody earlier this year, really towards the start of the season, said I was pretty crazy for talking about the $6 million price range for Samberg. Starting to wonder how off that's going to be at the end of this season. He's up to like 12 points in 33 games. Maybe a third of a point per game. That could help keep his cost down a little bit because he's not like scoring 30 or 30 points a week, but he still is putting up pretty good offensive numbers. And I think if you look at this team's goal differential and overall record and his ability to control shot share when he's on the ice, he has been one of our truly, truly elite skaters. And he's gone from a guy who I thought would be a good second pairing guy to we're talking elite first pairing sort of quality, playing 24 minutes a night recently, or nearly 24 minutes, just generally really impressing me. I'm thrilled with him. This year he's his ice time average is up to nearly 21 minutes. That is considerably up from 16 minutes last year. And you look at how much responsibility he's getting, 22 and a half minutes, 22 and a half, 24-ish tonight. Just an incredible growth from him. And without him, you saw this team's record really plummet. Yes, there were some other extenuating factors with that road trip, but Samberg was one of the true linchpins of this team. And I really hate to see what this team is like without him. So that next huge long-term contract extension, I really don't know that there's a price tag that I would be uncomfortable with. Obviously, you don't want to pay like $8 million necessarily, but I would be pretty happy with just about anything that gets him signed long-term. Make him, a career Jet, and we are golden. The other guy who I think has really stood out recently is Cole Perfetti. Ever since he said he needed to be more of a prick, he has been on an absolute tear. Cole Perfetti has now had, 8 points in his last 6 or so games. And he just seems to be really growing into a versatile offensive threat, right? Whether he's scoring goals, he's assisting. And the biggest thing that I think Perfetti has done this year, and he started it in previous seasons, but I don't think he got a lot of attention for it, but his forechecking game has really grown into one of his most reliable tool sets. This is a kid who's not afraid to really grind in the corners, throw his weight around, and really be a physical pest the whole game. He doesn't have elite skating, and I think that will always kind of hold him back a bit. But what he does so well is just be an undeniable threat along the walls. And because his passing and vision are so good, oftentimes once he actually forces a turnover or wins a puck battle, he then is able to create some sort of play that drives the puck towards the net. The guy is just elite at that sort of stuff. And the more that he's starting to really show this confident streak and just kind of swing his uh, for lack of a better phrase, his chutzpah around, he's been really, really fantastic. This is a guy who a lot of people said was too small to be a really effective player, a guy who was going to be, a liability for the Jets. And instead, he arguably plays a more physical game than Stanley does. He just has no fear. He'll work in the corners. He wins puck battles, and he is actually surprisingly difficult to dispossess. Super smart player. I think he's actually added some mass in the offseason, so his strength appears to be up. His offensive production recently has been great. In the past, I would say 6 games, he's had, 4 goals, 4 assists. Just really can't hate it. He's showing power play versatility, even strength versatility. Whatever you ask of him, he just seems to be willing to do, and I am very excited for him. I am curious to know what his next contract starts to look like, but I think it's really a testament to how much the coaching staff trusts him that under Bones, he really wasn't out in third periods much. Under Arneal, he'll even be out when the opponent's goal is empty, right? He is being used in so many more defensive situations. He has been given a much bigger responsibility. And my hope is that going forward, the Jets find a way to lock him up at a reasonable cap hit. I sort of wonder what his next deal looks like. Maybe it's in the $5.5 to $6.5 million range, somewhere in there. I don't quite know how that's going to all work out. But for the time being, they've got him on a great value contract. I am very excited to see what a full season of Perfetti, after this year looks like. I think his overall game has taken a huge step forward. He's on pace for like a 50-ish to 60-point season so far, especially if his recent scoring rate continues. That's maybe a little ambitious, but I don't know. I've always been a big believer in him. After a bit of a dry spell for a few weeks here, it seems like the Cole Perfetti that I expected to see has finally arrived. And so I hope he still continues to be a prick. I would never describe him that way, but apparently he is, very feisty and very competitive, and we all love to hear the lion roar. So curious to know what you think he's going to finish the season on points-wise. Drop your comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow, we'll probably have some more trade deadline preview coverage and maybe some, check-ins around the league and see what's going on. But like I said, for tonight's show, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets, go.